Disconnected to Digital, Breaking IT and OT Silos of Drug Manufacturing with Grantek. Before we get started, I'd like to present a couple of tips to help you all get the most out of today's discussion. If you have any questions that come up throughout the webinar, please enter them into the chat. We'll be collecting them for later at the Q&A after the discussion. And you'll see at least one poll question come up so we can keep things a little bit interactive. Please answer as best as you can, reflecting your current circumstances. Thank you. All right, just a little short agenda. We just had the welcome. Next, we'll get to introductions, myself and my guest. And I'll talk a little bit about the IT and OT space. Then we'll get into the panel discussion, a few questions that my guest Jim and I are gonna answer. And then we're going to have a Q&A afterwards. All right, so let's get to it. First up, introductions. So I could go first. My name's Bryon Hayes. I'm a consultant with Grantek. I've been with the company for 24 years. I started out as a fresh-faced engineer straight out of school. And my career has grown with the company, and I've been primarily focused in the life sciences industry, where I've implemented and managed countless automation and information projects. As a consultant, I act as a trusted advisor to Grantek's customers, which are focused on the pharma, biopharma, and med devices industries. I'm actively engaged with International Society of Pharmaceutical Engineers, or ISPE, especially in Canada, and I've been involved in the Pharma 4.0 community of practice within ISPE for many years. Jim?
I'm Jim Harten. My intro isn't as polished as Bryan's, but I've started my career as a systems integrator. Then I moved down to an original equipment manufacturer of life sciences equipment, and then spent the 10 plus years, and currently I'm a automation or support control systems and digital for life sciences manufacturing. Now, I just want to say that I'm speaking for myself and not on behalf of Lori.
Thanks, Jim. All right, so before we dive into the meat of today's discussion, I want to get a sense of where everyone is at in their organizations. So we've got a poll question up on the screen. Question is, how connected are the IT and the automation teams in your organization? So maybe take a moment to answer. Are your IT automation teams completely different organizational units? Are they in the same unit but separate within? Are they in the same group but they have separate missions within the group? Or are they truly collaborating and intertwined within your organization? So go ahead and submit your responses. It's really going to help Jim and I tailor our discussion as to where everybody's at here. Very interesting. It looks like pretty much everybody has responded that either you're in completely different organizational units or you're separate within the same unit. So this is exactly why we're here today, actually, because reality is when, even if you're in the same unit, there's still significant silos that need to be broken down. And so let's go ahead and talk about, why that might be. So now we're going to talk a little bit about going from disconnected to digital, and that's the journey that we're going to take today. So, for decades in pharmaceutical or really any manufacturing, IT and OT have operated in their own worlds. And there are good reasons for that, different missions, different priorities, different technologies. IT is focused on business systems, data management, enterprise applications. And, meanwhile, the automation team is down on the plant floor, focused on keeping production up, running 24/7. But here's the thing, digital transformation is forcing these two worlds to collide. So when you want real-time production data flowing into your business intelligence systems, you need to integrate MES with ERP. When you're implementing serialization or trying to enable predictive maintenance, suddenly IT and OT can't operate in silos anymore. That's really both an opportunity and a challenge. So let's break down what makes these two domains so different. So this slide here really illustrates the fundamental differences between IT and OT. So let's walk through this, because understanding these differences is critical to understanding why convergence can be challenging. Starting with the IT team on the left, their main focus is on managing data, the flow of information throughout an enterprise, and their top priority is confidentiality. They're protecting the business data, the customer information, and IP. They're really thinking about user identity management, so who has access to what. The life cycle of their equipment is typically 3 to 5 years. So, when your laptop's 4 years old, they're already planning on replacing it, working with off the shelf and standardized hardware that can easily be swapped out. And applications they're dealing with are things like ERP or supply chain management software, business intelligence, CRM, those types of systems. Standards come from the IT world, ISO 27000 series for information security, NIST frameworks, SOC 2 compliance. Now, if you flip over to OT on the right-hand side, OT's focus is really controlling physical processes, making sure that, the bioreactor that you have is running exactly the right temperature, filling lines operating correctly, CIP cycles are executing properly. Their top priority is availability. Production cannot stop. Network outage in OT doesn't mean that someone can't check an email. It means that a batch fails or a product's lost, or you might be looking at tens of millions of dollars in impact potentially. They're thinking about device identity management. Like what PLC is talking to which HMI. And the life cycle for hardware is around 10 to 20 years. The PLC that you installed in 2008, it's probably still running, still validated. you know, Still can't be touched without change control. And these are purpose-built devices, the specialized hardware that's designed for harsh industrial environments. And the applications that the OT team are dealing with, these are like PLC programs, SCADA systems, MES, DCS, HMIs, and the standards that we use really are like ISA 95 for manufacturing operations, ISA 62443 for OT cybersecurity, as well as the NIST 882. And so here's the problem, really. When you need these two worlds to work together, and you've got fundamentally different priorities, different life cycles, different standards, different ways of thinking about identity and workflow management. With IT saying, okay, we need to patch that Windows server on your SCADA system right away. There's a critical security vulnerability here. OT says, well, hey, that system's validated. It's running a critical process. We've got a 2-week change control process before we can even touch it. So who's right? Well, they both are, and that's exactly the kind of tension that we need to manage. All right, so now we'll talk about where IT and OT intersect in terms of the functional hierarchy of manufacturing. So this is the ISA 95 model. If you're in manufacturing, you've probably seen some version of this before. So level 0 and level 1, we're talking about physical production process, the sensors, the actuators, the basic control systems. This is pure OT territory. IT traditionally doesn't venture down here, except when you venture into the world of IIoT, but we're going to put a pin in that for now. At level 2, we have SCADA systems, HMIs, supervisory control, monitoring and automated control of the production process. Still primarily OT, but you're starting to see some IT technologies creep in, with modern SCADA systems running on virtual servers, using SQL databases, and connected to your corporate network. Level 3, that's where things get really interesting. This is your manufacturing operations management layer, where your batch record systems live, your manufacturing execution systems. This is traditionally where IT and OT have met. Systems consume data from users, processes, machines, along with data from the business side to manage production and report results. So we're talking about like dispatching, production, detailed scheduling, reliability assurance, quality management, track and trace. And we're dealing with a time frame of shifts, hours, minutes, and seconds. So real-time or near real-time data passing back and forth. At level 4, you're dealing with business planning and logistics, your ERP systems, plant production scheduling, operations management. This is where IT is traditionally sitting in, and it's their domain. The time frames here you're dealing with are months, weeks, days, shifts. So here's what's changing. These IT technologies are moving down into level 2, and like I said earlier, maybe even level 1. PLCs are getting smarter, running on Ethernet networks, edge computing devices, collecting data at the sensor level and pushing it up to the cloud. So the line between IT and OT, that's blurring. And this blurring brings both opportunities and challenges, which is exactly what we're going to discuss today. So where do IT and OT typically meet? Well, as I just mentioned, it's traditionally been at level 3 in MES in manufacturing operations management. MES sits right at that boundary. It needs to talk down to the SCADA systems PLCs on the plant floor to get real-time production data. It needs to talk up to the ERP system to receive production orders and send back production results. But here's what's happening. IT technologies are expanding within manufacturing. They're moving down into level 2 and level 1 systems. And why is that? Well, there's really a few reasons. First, modern control systems, they're more connected. PLCs have sometimes even multiple Ethernet ports. They have web servers on them. They communicate using IT-like protocols like OPC UA or MQTT. And secondly, there's a huge push for data. Everyone wants production data for analytics, for AI and machine learning applications, for predictive maintenance. And that means more connectivity between OT and IT systems. Third, cloud and edge computing are changing the game, and companies want to leverage cloud-based analytics. But to do that, you need to get data from the plant floor up to the cloud, which means traversing both the OT and the IT networks. And finally, cybersecurity regulations are forcing IT and OT to work together. So in pharma, we're dealing with regulators asking about cybersecurity now. We're thinking about, 62443 compliance. You can't secure an OT environment without IT involvement, and IT can't really understand the OT risks without someone with automation expertise. So take a look at this diagram here. This is what a connected pharmaceutical manufacturing facility might look like. You could see the full ISA 95 stack from levels 0, which is the physical process, all the way up to level 4 ERP systems. Notice all those connection points, data flowing up and down between the levels. So here's the key point. The OT devices, they're often connected in some way to the corporate network to facilitate data exchange with the enterprise level applications. And this poses a unique challenge to IT and OT professionals alike. Why is it a challenge? Because every one of those connection points is a potential integration headache and a potential cybersecurity risk. OT systems require a robust, hardened infrastructure to eliminate downtime and data loss. And this might not be in direct alignment with the IT department's business drivers. I'm putting that a little bit diplomatically here. IT, they want flexibility and agility and rapid updates, whereas OT wants stability, reliability, and controlled change. But the reality is, in a truly connected facility, the automation and the IT teams have to work together. They just have to. There's not really another option here. So the question isn't whether IT and OT will converge. It's how we manage that convergence effectively. And that's what Jim and I are going to dig into now. We're going to talk about some of the common challenges, why breaking down these silos matters, some strategies that actually work, and how you can measure success. So with that context established, Jim, I want to bring you into the conversation now. So let's start talking about the real world challenges and solutions. Our first question here is, what is the best way to identify common integration and cybersecurity challenges? And, Jim, you're living this every day inside a pharmaceutical manufacturing environment. When you're dealing with IT and OT integration, what are the biggest challenges that you face? And how do you even start to identify, where those problems actually are?
So the best way to identify common challenges, I think, is to try and make sure that you not really make the other group feel your pain, but have some understanding that two, find some common ground with the IT team, and two, kind of you have to do two things. You have to understand what the concerns of the IT group are, what their projects are, what their challenges are. Get an understanding of what they work with, who they deal with. If they're dealing with end users, you have to understand that you as an OT person or as an automation person is probably a more prepared and skilled person that they deal with. You can't assume that every person they deal with is got as much information and knows as much as you do. So, when you go to them, it's not like you go to your peers who have they are dealing with a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds who are expecting a lot more from it. So I'd like to go in whenever initially talk to an IT person, I tell me I'm going to be special. I'm going to be different than the others. I'm going to be, in some ways, I'm going to be more of a challenge, but in some ways, I'm going to have more knowledge. So, I like to set it up right at the beginning. I'm a different kind of customer. I'm going to be different than your normal customer. I'm going to be a special, person that you deal with unique challenges. And also, one of the things I find is sometimes a lot gets lost in, like, unless you sit down and talk about what each person's challenge is, you're going to get lost in communication. You're going to, if someone wants access to something and you don't want to give it because it's an OT device or it's something that you commonly would have in your control, automation engineers would keep things like the control panel or the control room or the electrical room as kind of their domain. But as if someone from IT has a need to get in there, one of the most important things is to find out, like, what was the challenge that forced you to ask that question? What are people asking you to do that, or what are people, like, what are you dealing with that's requesting that? And then they might say, well, this is what happened, or this is what I deal with every day, and you come to an agreement. But one of the things that you did mention, Bryon, about the patching and how you can't patch. Patching is important, but the patching schedule that is required by IT is very strict and scheduled and regular. And our outages, and when we have the ability and we only have windows to work, is not regular. It can be scheduled, but it's not a regular event, and it can change. So the person who has to manage those changes and those windows and other parts of manufacturing that will have to do things during that window is the automation engineer. Now, the automation engineer, in order to make common ground, can communicate why it's important to patch, why it's important to do secure, why it's important to keep your software up to date. But you also have to explain to the IT person or the person on the IT cybersecurity side that it's not an easy process. On the other side of the coin, you can't just completely discount patching. You can't discount security. So it kind of puts from my standpoint as an OT automation engineer, it puts that person in a tough spot because I have customers that I have to keep the system running, but I also have to, maintain security for my systems. So a lot of it's coming to a common ground, finding out there's a little bit of compromise, but what's important and the way to answer the question is you have to communicate what your challenges are to the other person, and you have to understand what the other person's challenges are. And if you don't do that, you won't come to a common ground.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What do you think, Bryon?
No, I mean that totally makes sense because I mean when you don't have that common ground, you end up with for example, me as a system integrator, back when I was in my younger days and going to site and commissioning projects, you're typically dealing with a project manager and an OT professional, and the IT team isn't really there when you show up. And so you get to site and you plug into the network, and immediately you find out devices can't communicate, you can't get traffic to flow, stuff like that. Or we had an instance one time where we got called in, and a customer, because they hired a vendor to provide a vibration monitoring solution and for predictive maintenance, and it was causing issues on their network. And those were, again, it was one level or one side of the picture, managing the project, and the other side of the other side, the IT side, they weren't really involved. And so yeah, it was. I mean, I wouldn't say that's a really good way to identify a challenge. I mean, it's kind of too late at that point. the challenges are you just caused a project delay because you can't communicate or there's issues on the network. But um, one thing that I started seeing more and more on is you know customers, their IT groups, including OT assets in an asset management or asset inventory tool. So pulling together documentation of what is all included, and it's not just servers and networking tools like switches and firewalls. It's you know HMIs and PLCs and things like that. So you have like a full scale asset inventory, and you can document really there like what like create a data flow map of what actually talks to what or what's supposed to communicate with what and how. Um, and that might be a way where you can before you when you're going to add a new system, you add it to this set of documents, and you can identify, oh well, that's not going to work because see here, this these two VLANs or these two devices are in two separate VLANs, and you got to open up a firewall rule or whatnot. So you can kind of get ahead of those types of things.
I'm gonna say, well, asset inventory is important. Well, I mean, IT and cybersecurity are always going to say asset inventory is important, and they're not wrong. You need to know what your assets are in your facility, both in your manufacturing facility and you're in, just your IT facility in general. And an asset inventory or an asset management tool would also help you figure out what computer, what OT devices you have, what kind of firmware level you have, and I'm not going to say and if I have a tool that is accessible by a lot of users, though, it gives a little bit of pause to the automation engineer, because you may have someone who comes in and looks at the asset inventory and treats all the assets the same way, or requires you to, tag it a certain way, or provide new tags, or provide all kinds of information. And, then you lose whatever you have a possibility of losing the urgency of your systems when you do that, right? So, I mean, I would think a middle ground might be to have, there are tools and software out there specifically for, the OT layer to do asset management. The big problem with that is it's another responsibility for an already pretty busy automation engineer or IC engineer to take on. And there are some people who, like me or other people who are interested in that, or interested in this piece and want to learn more about networking. But there are people who, quite frankly, are not. And they want to work on continuous improvement. They want to, focus more on the customer. Maybe they're, involved in other components of automation engineering, but they just have no interest in learning about the network and learning about, and getting involved in, that side of the business. They just consider it someone else's responsibility. And if you create that layer, you got to own it. And there are groups that, don't really want to take that on. And that's another challenge that, the ownership and who takes ownership and who's responsible and who might have a group and who doesn't have a group is another challenge.
Oh, that's good. Good thoughts all around. Let's go see what our next question is here. Breaking silos between IT and OT. What is the importance of breaking silos? And do you have a best real world digital transformation stories? So, I actually have I don't know if it's a good example, but it is an example of what happens when IT and OT are siloed. We had a customer that wanted to do EBR, and they basically gave IT the keys to the castle with the whole procurement process, from putting together the list of vendor selection, and really other stakeholders within manufacturing or automation or maintenance. They weren't involved in this process, and the platform was purchased, and then when it came to implementation, there was a number of roadblocks, legacy devices that couldn't really communicate with the new software, lack of understanding on how the OT systems were architected, and other hurdles. And they had some consultants that just said, okay, well, let's put an OPC bridge, we'll get all the data we need. And then not all those devices are capable of talking OPC software. Some systems were decades old. It took a lot more work to end up getting the system in place. And some of the features actually didn't get in there because it took, more time and more money. Jim, what have you seen some examples of where breaking down silos actually led to better outcomes? Like what's worked at your company or others you've been involved with?
Um, well, I think I have had some good situations where I've been able to take, being able to virtualize environments is a really important one because it's got benefits for both IT and OT. Um, from an OT standpoint, it's a PC sitting on a manufacturing floor that I may not have access to that could break in the middle of a run. But I mean, it's another for an IT system. It's another computer that, well, from an IT system, it can be a real asset inventory nightmare because it might be tied to a piece of equipment instead of as a host or a computer. So it's kind of a problem for both. So it's a great example of where it could break into a silo. But one of the examples I had was I had a system that was traditionally or currently a physical set of servers. And I said, there's no reason why we can't virtualize this. Let's virtualize it. So I put together, and I wasn't really an expert, but I put together a example of how I would virtualize it. And I took it by the vendor, got some vendor recommendations for the software, and I brought it to the IT person. In this case, it was for an external, so there's a little more additional collaboration that I had to do with this individual. But what we ended up doing was I was involved in procurement. I was able to help, and the way that it was a collaboration was that, I would talk to that person, the IT person, and I say, "What do you use? What brands you use? What software do you use? What goes in your network stack? What goes in your building?" And I would say, "Okay, we'll get that." So you make sure that you don't bring. You try very hard not to bring foreign hardware to their space if you don't have to. That's very important for things like what they have, their agreements, their support contracts, whatever other things they have, how the replacements, how easy it is to do, what's it called, replacement strategies, tech refreshes. So just as simple as saying, what is your brand? We'll use that. It kind of helps break the silos down. But, we worked together and we were able to be the first, place where that system would virtualize. The original system didn't virtualize after that. But we were able to break through and we did it first. We did it first in a harder, place to do it, where you're talking about having an end customer, collaborating with an external CMO and doing something new. And the way I did that was you had to understand what was important to the other person's silo or the other person's world and accommodate that. And so we were able to do it. We were able to virtualize it. If we needed, say, more CPU power, that was a very simple process instead of having to maybe buy new hardware. And we had very little hardware on the floor. And it was a very successful, story. And it was really something where if I hadn't brought it up, it wouldn't happen. So, but I didn't do it by myself. If the other person hadn't wanted to do it, if he said, "This isn't my responsibility, I'm not doing it," wouldn't happen. Not even close. 100% of 90% of the lifting was from that other person. So from the IT side. And that's another thing you have to realize is, a lot of the work when you're talking about virtualization, when you're talking about setting things up, it's not under your control. And you have to be fighting with other priorities in that space. There's other people who want to have this stuff set up. There's other virtual machines that people are going to want outside of your organization. Once you get into that space, now you're in a common space. Having hosts and SANs and VNets is a common space. It's not a specific to a cheap space. So You have to just make yourself familiar with, what the other person's concerns are and try and meet them if you can.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's not necessarily this isn't necessarily a technical problem. It's an organizational and relationship a building situation where you're creating collaboration and uh you know two groups working as one, helping each other out and helping the business run together, right? Because they're, I guess, both IT and OT, their customer, they have the same customer, right? It's the business, the people, the manufacturing your products, your widgets, your you know biologics or what have you. So sounds like it's um yeah, this is transcending more of the technical scenario and getting more into like relationship building. So
Yeah, you're probably going to see more of this and see other questions.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, like the next question here is like, what do you feel are the best strategies to integrate the IT and OT systems? And I mean, yeah, Jim, you've just gave good example, and you've lived through a bunch of integration projects that worked. I'm sure you've lived through a bunch that didn't. So from the inside, what strategies actually help the teams collaborate and work together more effectively?
Um, yeah, I think it's a very soft skill, but I think something that's important that I've seen people who don't know how to do this is that, you're an automation engineer, you're something and you're working with urgency and maybe you have a ticket or maybe you have a problem or maybe you have something. You need this person in IT to fix your problem. So, a common thing that most people do is they want to start with their problem. They want to say, hey, this is my problem. Problem A isn't working and I need you to fix problem A. But problem A isn't on that person's mind. And problem A isn't the most important thing that this person had to deal with all the way. So what's important is you need to try and show that what is important to them is also important to you. So, when I go to talk to someone in networking or someone in infrastructure, I'll be like, what did you have to deal with today? What were you doing? Or even know something about what's going on. If there was a big project that was going on in MT that this person might be a part of, maybe you kind of bring that up. So that way, that person knows that what's important to them is important to you. So that when you bring up something that's important to you, it can be important to them. And they might get it done. Because in the end of the day, if you bring up your thing and you didn't do it the right way and you didn't make it in a priority for that person, it's not a priority to that person. It's not really that person's problem. It's your problem that it manifested itself. You walk away from that conversation and you didn't get that thing resolved. You had to deal with it. So you need to use these strategies so when you walk away, that thing gets fixed. So that's kind of what you have to deal with. And I have had to coach people on that because it's not intuitive when you need to get something done to talk about something else.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're both engineers, so we work with a lot of engineers, and that might be a symptom of just the individuals that we tend to work with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think getting that yeah,
We're all very blue. We're blue, the unknown. Everybody not knows the insights. The insights colors is important
yeah,
because we're all very blue. We're all very technical minded. So we really are focused on the problem and how to fix the problem. So we're really one like, how do I fix the problem? And you're not concerned about um, how people feel about it or things like that. But how people feel can ultimately help you fix the problem. And that's a little bit of maturity that helps with this is, the way to get your blue, the way to fix the problem, there's another way. It's almost like like if you go into any sort of, I took some management training and if you go into it and you start realizing that it's not really about the problem, it's about communication and stuff like that. You realize that this is just another problem or another challenge you have to solve. it's a different challenge. It's a people challenge. It's not a technical challenge.
Yeah.
So, even engineers, if you're making this great command instrument, you're like, oh my God, this is so different than everything I do. I just want to go down and, write some code. Just think of it as a different kind of challenge, a different kind of problem you need to solve or that you need to work on. And, part of that is you need to know how you come across when you go into the organization. So if you have to say, if someone else came into me and ran in and immediately just talked about their problem, how would you react? And that's how that person you're going to deal with from IT is going to react when you come with the thing that you think is the most important thing in the world. So should I come up with more technical strategies? Because that's really what it boils down to is common ground. You can also, there are a lot of people who don't know that automation engineers deal with a lot of the same problems. Things like backing up systems, business continuity, redundancy, resilience. And a lot of these things are things that are built into their systems. And there are people in IT who don't know a lot of what an automation engineer does. And then the next challenge is there are reasons why the tools in automation engineering are the way that they are. You can't take a real-time historian and just replace it in the SQL Vegas because they won't correct error. And you then have to make sure that you have an understanding of what is different in the automation space and why it's different, why it needs to stay the way it is. And that's where you're like, okay, well, what kind of person is this? Do they want to know about stories? Do they want to know about data? Do they want to know, okay, I'm compressing data and I need to scan or collect 100,000 points every second. My software can do that, and your software can't.
Yeah.
And why? Why do I need to collect data every second? That's another thing. So that's where there can be a learning. There's people who don't know. And if they don't know, they may want to know or want to understand. So the other thing I think is important is kind of starting out with why. Like, why do I have to be different? Why isn't it so important that, I collect data like this? Why is it so important that I have to keep my systems running? And, why am I different? Why do I want to protect my systems? Where do I come from? Why is my trust level so low? What has happened to me in the past that made it that way? Is another, kind of key conversation strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess outside of the people and the technical, I guess the kind of the third edge of the triangle would be process, right? Because I mean, if you don't have process to support this like intergroup collaboration, and you're relying on top down, thou shalt do this type of things, you're not going to have that integration, that welcome integration between the two teams. So like joint project execution methodologies where both teams are involved at the beginning, like both the IT and the automation teams. Both teams are involved in gathering requirements for the system that you want to put in, and shared, maybe shared testing. Both of you involved in vendor selection, so you don't have one team, who may not speak the language of the other team, pushing this particular vendor for without thinking about what the other team's requirements might be, and having clear standards in place that actually involve both organizations, and just that collaborative governance, so that where both teams, or where it spans both teams, would be that, I guess, that sort of third edge is like getting that buy-in from everybody.
Yeah, I mean, involvement is important. Like, both sides will be concerned if they're not involved. Another thing that I have seen work is developing a RACI, a matrix of who's responsible for what, who's consulted with what. And it can be a little contentious if it's done right, to be honest. But you don't necessarily want to just point at it, or you can make those relationships work. But 100% I agree with Mickey, Bryon. If you have all the members of that team sitting at a table at the same time and going over what's happening, it makes things a lot better. You're able to plan better. You're able to strategize. You're able to react to things that are unplanned better. And you also need to make sure that if you get any positive feedback, that it's not just yours. You make sure you reflect that back to the rest of the group. If you're one of the things about, automation engineer, it's a good and a bad thing is you do have visibility to manufacturing. So you got to make sure that if you got a kudos that really wasn't yours, you got to make sure you reflect that back to the rest of the team, to the rest of the IT, who was probably a little more in the background. Don't just let it don't just let it die. Make sure that it's important and make sure that it's spread out, and do it in a tiny mirror, because it helps, not only to give the feedback, but if you do something or something works, you need to go back and say, hey, that thing worked and we were able to do X because of it. And then they can really feel that they're kind of a part of something. Because the other thing that automation engineering and network and architecture have in general is it's kind of thankless. And if you do your job right, nothing ever happens. So and you don't want to do your job. You don't want to be that popular. This is, yeah. But when things do happen or you do get a compliment, you got to make sure you spread it out. Make sure everybody knows that they were a part of something that made a difference.
All right. So this question here, this is gonna be a tough one. Around is there a good ROI metric for successful IT/OT convergence projects? And I mean, a lot of the benefits here, as we kind of already kind of talked through in a few of the questions before, was there a lot of these benefits are actually indirect. I mean, Jim, when you're talking to your leadership about investing in IT and OT integration, or leveraging IT technologies in an OT project, I mean, how would you go about making a business case for this?
Well, I mean, it's important to have some benchmarking. So where you say you take a look at the system before the convergence and how did it work? How many tickets did you have? How many manual event? How many times did you have to do manual actions? How many times was there errors related to human error? How many times have you had delay based on human error? How many hours did that take? How much hours delay? How much rework was required? You can also look at things like adverse events. There's all different industries, but did you ever have to take this system down? Or you ever have to provide? In the life sciences industry, there's deviations and change controls and stuff like that we have to track, and there can be like a set price for, or a set cost for how long it takes to do that, how much manpower it is to go from the beginning to end. So you look at the existing system and say, what is the system? What am I fixing? What am I going from? I'm going from one thing to another thing. Well, for the existing thing, what were the pain points of this existing thing? And how can my project, not only what are the things that were pain points, but what is the cost of? Is the cost delay? Is it downtime? Is it compliance? Is it potential for lost time? And then you have to find a way to assign value to those items. And then that's the way you do the return on investment. You say, this new thing that I'm putting in removes these pain points. And this was the thing that was a pain point. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I always tell, people is, before you make your changes, benchmark your system. Because people want to just go in and change it. I'm like, before you change it, benchmark what you have. Because if you don't benchmark now, it's going to be harder in the future to track your improvements over time. So, and metric can change over time too. I mean, a lot of things, it goes, you have a projects. Yeah, you know what? I should have stopped there.
Well, I was
I
actually
should have gone to you, right?
well, that I was actually was something I was going to bring up is around like what about project delivery timelines and speed, right? Like it's like hey before I would when I'm implementing my project I would just submit 20 tickets to get my VMs built or this done or that done or network ready, and I would just sit there and wait, and then poke them every week, and then finally 4 months later stuff was getting done. It's like, well, hey, now we started collaborating, and it took our overall project timeline down from, let's say, 24-month project to like a 12-month project, because we're not bouncing tickets around. We're working together as a team. We're meeting regularly. People are engaged, and they want to be helpful. Um, yeah, that was one of my thoughts around a potential ROI. That's at the beginning of the life cycle, right? When you're doing the actual project, and then like you already mentioned things like reliability, right? Like uptime and stability, system stability, because the two teams work together to put it in. Um, and
And you have to every once in a while bringing it up.
Mhm.
Like, let's say the amount of time something happened went to zero. Then sometimes you got to say 6 months later, hey, by the way, do you remember how we had this thing that used to happen every 2 weeks? Look, it's not happening. I mean, if I'm reducing it, it's a one thing. And I could say, well, I have a 20% or 30% reductions. But if I go down to zero, then you have to make sure that it becomes a story
Mhm.
that you tell. And the reason you do that is so that people know that you are valued. Because there's times where you don't say that. You don't remind people that they used to have this thing that they don't have anymore. They'll just move on to the other thing. It's not important for them. But it used to be. It used to be a real problem for them. So, if I can make a reduction or if I have a major issue, then I can show ROI. That's fine. There's a lot of continuous improvement projects that we work on, either it's OT or together. Like the eliminate the problem completely. Well, you got to make sure that we find a metric on the core.
Mhm. And I mean, I understand the management, they want to see numbers, but I mean, going beyond that, are there maybe softer benefits you've seen from better collaboration that, transcend numbers and are more, um, you know, I guess more like holistic, I guess, like just a better all around working environment, for example, or are there things like that? Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are working together on a project, you probably won't get blindsided as much by information. If you have a regular cadence of what's going on, you won't uh, you won't find yourself without a resource when you need them. Um, so yeah, there are definitely benefits from continuing that communication. Um, and one of the things I always really like to say is, I'm not going to be in every meeting. I'm not going to be in every forum. I want to make sure that yeah, I'm going to represent people from the IT in some of my meetings. I'm going to kind of expect sometimes that in IT leadership meetings that at some point they're going to sort of be looking out for me as well. And that can be incredibly helpful, that I don't have to be everywhere when some decision comes in, that my, what OT or what automation need might be represented there. So it's a little softer, but it's pretty important.
yeah, excellent. Well, now we'll get to see if anybody has any questions for either you or I or both of us. Um, okay, I do see one here. So how can we talked about challenges? How can OT and IT better communicate their unique challenges when they don't control the same systems or have the same priorities?
I think sometimes it's best to draw a picture. Oh,
Hmm.
best to draw a picture or kind of like from my standpoint, I say, well, what is something that look at something that the client or the company does. Like if the company makes something or the company, provides a utility or the company manufacture of a certain good, and you're in automation or you're closer to manufacturing, then there's going to be something that you are responsible for. And if something about that, whether it's, the data or a supervisory system or like a scheduling system is in IT's world, then it's important that you kind of start at your world and say, this is the piece that gets the thing that we make money or that we provide for our customers out the door. And, I, as an automation engineer, I'm accountable for not only the thing that goes out the door, but some, either it's a piece of data or it's a report or it's something that, goes with to make sure that the quality or the level of uh, supply or whatever it is, I'm responsible for that output, that deliverable. And so I'm accountable for it. But there might be pieces of that puzzle, there might be pieces of the network, there might be pieces of the infrastructure architecture that I'm not responsible for. But I'm still accountable for that thing and for that deliverable. And it's still necessary that system or that deliverable happens all the time. So that's kind of how you say, look, I can't get from A to D without you. And if something in your world doesn't work, I'm accountable when I'm going to give them E. And I think that's important, but you got to draw that picture. You got to make that case. You got to provide examples. Is important. It's like, okay, well, when that activity that happened, this is what it meant to me. This is what I had to deal with when that happened. Or when I had this happen, this is so give examples. Some people like data, some people like stories. I think you not got to do both, and you got to show, and then you got to make it important for everybody, because we all work at the same company. Like the company makes a certain thing, not just IT doesn't make something different than Ouch. We all are responsible for some good that's delivered, no matter what your industry is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like, yeah, okay, manufacture something, and in a regulated environment, there's the batch record, and the batch record relies on all this data, but you don't control the path, like you said, from A to B, right? So you're accountable for the manufacturer QA teams to see a batch record at the end of the day, and they come to you. So, well, I didn't get my batch, or I didn't get, this report didn't get attached because it didn't get printed, because it didn't get generated, because the system didn't do it. I'm like, yeah, there's both teams are involved in making all of that, all of those processes, work from in the chain to have a successful record. Yeah, so telling our story and making sure that everybody's aware of the importance in the end goal of what this. It'd be almost funny to do it. What not to do? Yeah, that question. What not to say. Yeah, what not to say.
Yeah.
We probably have time. We got about 6 more minutes to go, so we probably have time for one more question. So how can the OT teams effectively explain their operational and safety constraints to the IT teams that manage, the server hardware or the virtualized hardware and the network?
Yeah, I mean, the safety is kind of super critical. But how to communicate the safety concerns? I think depending on the industry, a lot of it's about time scale. Like, because can something fail in a second? Can something fail in a half second? If I have, if I lose instrument air in half a second, my plant shuts down or my equipment shuts down. There could be other safety related things that are on those sort of same like scans or things. So that, the fact that I need to have my systems up that level of criticality and that level of, kind of speed and frequency is not the same, like your slideshow. It's not the same scan frequency as the IT world. So I'm trying to be very generic about it, Brian, but you know, that's kind of that's one piece that is how you communicate what you do and why you need the certain systems that you have is, yeah, but it was a second of data. You know, my email doesn't come in a second. Well, it'll come back. But I mean, if I lose 5 seconds of data, lose 10 seconds of data, depending on what I've justified, I might have an issue. Might have something I have to explain. I might have something I need to investigate. So,
Yeah. It's like if I have an email that either doesn't come or it comes twice, I mean, I'll live. And I don't have to explain that to QA later on when they but if there's a gap in a trend or in a report or what have you, you know, somebody's going to come hunting me down later, right? For like why is that like that? And I think that's probably explaining that and like what causes what may cause that gap and um to the other side so that they understand, you know, what you're what you have to answer for, I guess, or what you both, and ultimately you're both gonna have to answer for it.
yeah.
Ideally. Um,
Yeah. And I think I think the two teams can work together, can plan together good, but the responses, like how we need to respond or what we're responding to is different. But if I know that something's coming, I can do the plan, I can create a project, but I can get everything ready. And then that point we kind of communicate together. And then you have to communicate that the reason you're doing the thing is because of what you have to, why you're fixing this thing because of how you have to respond if something fails. So that's kind of what I want to communicate is like, what's the impacts in my world if something fails?
yeah, excellent. All right. Well, that was our last question that we have time to take. So just want to thank the audience there for attending. All registered attendees will get a recording of the session. And also want to thank you, Jim, for sitting down with me today and you know, having this discussion. I think it was really valuable, and I feel that our attendees will get a lot out of the session as well. So, and if anyone else has any additional questions that we didn't answer today and they want to continue the conversation, send an email to info@grantek.com and somebody will respond.
For having me, Ryan.
All right. Very welcome.